Hey, what's up, you guys? So, tonight I have decided to do something a little different, something that goes a little bit out of the routine for me, and something that definitely steps me out of my comfort zone, and that is exploring history things. And the reason I say this goes outside of my comfort zone is because I think that history is boring. When I was in school, I hated it. I would pay good money to not have to take those classes. But now that I've become a little older, I find myself fascinated by a lot of this stuff. And the other day, I was trying to find out a Japanese term for something, and then that led me to something else, and then something else, and then something else, and it dwelt on rituals. And I said, I would have never thought about doing a topic on rituals, nor exploring them myself. So I thought I would stream about it and see what I learn and what you guys learn, or what you guys know, or what we learn, and you'll see just how much I don't know. So yeah, let's just dive into it, I guess. So I'm on a website called ancientorigins.net, and the name of this article is Forgotten Rituals and Magical Practices in Ancient History. Magical practices. Can't wait to see. So there's an intro paragraph. Rituals were usually designed to bring an individual something he was lacking or to ease his day to day life. Native Americans, for example, are known for their rituals to call rain, practiced during periods of drought. The Mayas and I thought it was Mayans and Aztecs practiced bloody rituals based on human sacrifice in order to appease the gods from the heavens and to gain abundance and prosperity. See, the biggest question in life that I have, that I guess everyone else has, is given that this doesn't really happen anymore, like this, where did the gods go? What happened? But from what I understand, you were supposed to have been deserted until the next major cataclysm happens or something, and then that's when they're supposed to come back or something to bring order back into the world. I don't know. Couldn't tell you. Um, Voodoo priests carried out death sending ceremonies under the patronage of Baron Samedi, a lower spirit of Haitian voodoo. I've heard about voodoo. It's interesting. Everything related to death belonged to the domain of Baron Samedi, who, as the god of death and resurrection, was able to shorten or to immediately end the life of the one upon whom he had been sent. The Japanese had yin yang priests called Onmuji, who practiced a vast number of magical rituals based on feng shui techniques borrowed from China. Scandinavians divine the future in runes, while the Romans sacrificed animals during ceremonies dedicated to the gods. Okay, this is getting boring. Let's go to actual things. Samedi means Saturday. Okay, interesting. In the same manner that the so-called Sabbath is also Saturday or something. But I know that's a whole nother thing. Let's see. Oh God, this is going to show you just how terrible I am at pronouncing things I don't see regularly. So the first thing I see here is Tomogenesis. And as magic tries to offer man that which he cannot attain by natural means, it is not surprising that many ancient texts of magic try to propose solutions for the resurrection of loved ones who have passed away. There are many rituals which were believed to bring the dead back to life. Still, even in magic, resurrecting the dead is seen as an unnatural act that can have serious consequences. Thus, not just resurrection techniques have filled the pages of numerous books of magic, but also the consequences of these rituals is believed to be one of such consequence. See, when it comes to me and bringing people back to life, as much as I would love to see some of my folks who have passed on come to life, I cannot help but think about precisely that, the consequences. I'm thinking that we all have to pass on for a good reason. And usually you pass on due to age. With age comes the deterioration of your body. And who the hell wants to be wandering around in the world, bring brought to life, or bring brought back, fuck, brought back to life after you have passed on, especially if you succumb to a disease. So, my biggest question is, if you revive someone, are you reviving them to where they pick up where they left off? Like, if you died from cancer, are you going to just be brought back to life and you're going to still feel miserable and the symptoms that you succumbed to? Or will you be just somehow healthy and be given a fresh start? But at the same time, if you're going to be old as hell, is that really what you want? And like, I'm not trying to crap on old people or anything, but I know that there are some people who feel like they're just done, like their quest in life is just done. So why would you individually, selfishly decide to bring back a person who has just passed on? What if people die precisely because they feel, oh, I'm done with life? But that doesn't make sense, because I have met people who have died in car crashes that were super young and they were not miserable in their lives at all. So I cannot say, yeah, you definitely confirm that you want to die and that's the way you pass on. That is ridiculous. But, one cannot help but speculate. But yeah, I think that in addition, imagine if everyone had the power to bring back an individual that has died. It's like everyone on the planet would bring back someone who's dead. Can you imagine just how extra cluttered the world would be, because you're not counting on the fact that so many people are coming back? Let's just, for the sake of insanity and simplicity, let's say that every person who is able to think for themselves has an opportunity to bring someone back to life. Imagine the sudden, like, downpour of people that would be present in the world that we're not ready for. So these are people that we have to give health insurance to, we gotta feed, we gotta give licenses to, we gotta educate, because a lot of people who have died, I'm pretty sure they're pretty behind in their education, especially if you decide to bring back people who died decades ago. It's like a job. You're not qualified until you get trained to be up to date with where the company's going. So imagine just bringing all these people back into the world. They're going to be overwhelmed, because the world as they knew it is so different now that that's going to bring them some stress. So it's not just going to be a smooth transition of, sure, let's bring back this person to life and that's it. I would imagine that this is something that one would have to consider. I don't think bringing someone back to life means that they're just somehow great at everything that life has to offer right now. In Japan, there is a religious practice called Shujendo. Shujendo. One of the practices involves supposedly resurrecting corpses. The resurrected corpse cannot talk or eat and must obey you. Okay, that is fucking terrifying. It's like a human pet that is absolutely obeys you, but at the same time, you cannot really communicate with them. Like, I cannot give a human entity a non-human treatment. I want to talk to you, I want to greet you, I want to know how you're doing, I want to know your wants, needs, desires, comforts, discomforts. So I think it's crazy that such a thing is there. That's going to be the thing of my nightmares now. um Homogenesis refers to the process through which a demon is believed to be created by means of a resurrection technique. This means that when a resurrection spell is used, two wholes are created and two spiritual entities may enter the world of the living. One of these entities being the spirit of the being that is to be resurrected, and the second the entity of demonic nature that is created in the process. So basically, you are bringing back the same person, but this person can also have an evil side attached to them. That is wild. In the case where there is exactly one hole that opens, residual demonic energy from the other dimension can cling on the spiritual entity that is being summoned to cross over the world of the living to be resurrected. When reaching the world of the living, the residual demonic energy can concentrate and result in the creation of a new demon. Okay, as many demon movies as I have watched, if there are anything like accurate when it comes to portraying what demons are supposed to be like, I am not interested in having beings like that amongst us. So no, they can stay away. They can just stay away. Oh, here there's like a diagram talking about the creation of a demon. Ugh. After the resurrection spell is complete, the two entities that have crossed over are said to be linked on the level of existence, such that if the resurrected individual dies, then the new demon also disappears. In addition, it was believed that the existence of the new demon was temporary, meaning that the demon would cease to exist unless it managed to become materialized or killed the resurrected individual in order to break the link. Okay, so the demon can totally destroy you, and it can still survive somehow? No, 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 no. Maybe demons in this aspect do not mean what I think demons are supposed to mean. Since resurrection spells deal with changing the natural order of things by means of undoing death, the T word can be seen here as an extreme natural consequence or as a debt that is to be paid. Yeah, like there has to be consequences for this beyond that are more complex than the ones that I tried to mention about, like a person who's just behind mentally on this stuff. People who wanted to extort money or haunt someone used Shogendo. If you can get a copy, read the Catalpa Bao. It explains many of these concepts. Sounds interesting. If you can, leave it in like a comment on another video. Actually, don't do that. I can actually open up a new window on my web browser. What was it called again? The Catalpa Bao. Kyo. Since you mentioned it, I'm just going to take a glimpse of it. This classic work describes the shamanic figures surviving in Japan today, their initiatory dreams, ascetic practices, the supernatural beings with whom they communicate, the geography of the other world in myth and legend. Originally published in December 1975. Kyo. I will consider it. Oh, bow. I wondered about that. I'm like, is it bow or is it bow? You just never know. All right. I have saved it. It was once believed the spirit could leave the body for limited periods of time without causing the death of the individual, but this separation was dangerous. If someone intervened magically, the person could capture the soul. Without its return to the body, the person would die. Other sorcerers could choose to work on the shadow in order to influence a particular person, and blah, 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 blah. Oh, that's the only one that is on this page. Okay, we can move to another site to see if they have anything. Okay. So I'm pretty sure that most of this stuff is going to dwell around death and stuff. Pretty depressing. Roughguides.com the world's most unusual ancient rituals. Uh-huh. Great Head Washing Festival, Mahamastakabhisheka, something. Festival has been taking place since 981 AD. Giant 17-meter high monolithic statue of Bahubali was commissioned. That means arm strength, much revered deity among Jains. They believe he lived around 20,000 years ago, and that during this time he challenged his brother Bharat to a fight to determine who would reign supreme over the kingdom of Abanatha. His enormous arm strength means he was close to killing his sibling. He was mortified by what he had done, so he discarded all his clothes as a penance, pulled out his hair, and stood naked and motionless for a year. The festival usually is celebrated every 12 years. It was last held in 2006, so the next should take place in 2018, which was last year. Living ghosts in the Daikon village of Benin. I'm so terrible at world history. See, that's what I'm saying. In school, they never talked about any of this, so I have just no idea about any of this. Let's see. River Turak at Tongi, Bangladesh. This is the largest gathering of Muslims around the world. During just one day, Biswa. Is that an I? Yeah, that's an I. Itima attracts 5 million devotees, twice the number that journey annually to the Hajj in Mecca. That I did know about. Isn't that like that one wall that everyone gathers around? It's not a wall, it's like a that. Bangladesh is a tiny country the size of Ireland, yet it has the population of Russia. 90% of this population is Muslim, most with a very low per capita income. This annual coming together is an opportunity for Muslims to seek the divine blessings of Allah without the steep cost of traveling to Saudi Arabia. It is celebrated every January. As a Buddhist priest, I have sat in on a few exorcisms. Some were scary as heck. Oh yeah, like the whole idea of what is supposed to happen during an exorcism to me is just absolutely terrifying. So like a part of me was like, that stuff is not real. But at the same time, I know that it is very real, but it's very easy for you to think it's not very real when you don't get exposed to it. And I also do not go out of my way to find out about this stuff. So yeah. I would hate to be an Aztec citizen back when human sacrifice was normal in Mexico. Yeah, I saw a little bit of that. I guess at some point we'll get to that. But yeah, isn't that crazy though? Imagine if that stuff was still happening so predominantly. A horrible way to die. Hajj is pilgrimage. They visit the Kaaba and stone the Jamarat. The Jamarat is supposed to represent the devil. I see. The Great Monlam Festival in Labulang Monastery, established in 1709. The Labulang Monastery is considered to be the leading Tibetan. I always forget how to say that. Monastery outside of Lhasa. It is the center of the Yellow Hat sect of Tibetan. Oh, why is that so gray? I need for stuff to be bold. Otherwise, like that, I cannot see it when it's like that. And I also need a new prescription. Followers of the Dalai Lama. During this 4-day festival, the entire monk could attend the great debate in the presence of the living Buddha. praying for the enlightened one's blessings. It takes place during the first lunar month of the Tibetan calendar, usually around February. I have heard of that, come to think of it. Good Friday in Antigua, Guatemala. Tens of thousands of purple-robed penitents journey from all over Central America to participate in the Easter ceremonies here. At dawn, Roman centurions march through the streets of the ancient capital of Guatemala, calling out the sentence for Jesus' death. Virgin del Carmen Festival in Pocartambo, Peru, nestling in a village below Mount Osungate. The remote town of Pocartambo celebrates the Earth Mother, patron saint of the mestizo population during the Quechua month of earthly purification. The festival dates from 1662, and for 3 days the town renews its faith, joy, and hope for a better future. From the rooftops, mythical birds and animals attempt to attract the attention of the life-size image of the Virgin as she is carried through the town. The festival is held annually between 15th and 17th of July. Kewl, Abbots, Bromley Horn Dance in Staffordshire, England. English city and town names never sound like what they look like, so I'm pretty sure that I messed that up. The horn dance is an ancient fertility celebration. Is believed to be a part of a pagan ritual, hunting ritual, with origins that can be traced back to Saxon times. It was probably first performed at the Bartholomew Fair near the Burton-on-Trent in 1226. The 6 pairs of reindeer horns carried by the dancers have been carbon dated to 1065. Carbon dating. That was one of my favorite things about, or one of the few things that I enjoyed about history classes when they would talk about that. Around the time of the Norman conquest. I like that name, Norman. There are references in the Bible to the wearing of deer horns as a sign of strength. The ritual takes place on the Monday following the first Sunday after September the 4th. Let's see. I'm sort of just scanning through to see if anything out here stands out. Let's read about Egyptian ones. Ancient.eu. Ancient Egyptian mortuary rituals. Latsa, latsa, latsa death. Let's see what the comments are saying. Can you read the Necronomicon? Probably not. In a second, I'll look that up and see what that's about. Can't say I've heard of it before. Ever since European archaeologists began excavating in Egypt in the 18th and 19th centuries CE, the ancient culture has been largely associated with death. Even into the mid-20th century CE, reputable scholars were still writing on the death-obsessed Egyptians whose lives were lacking in play and without joy. Mummies in dark labyrinthine tombs, strange rituals performed by dour priests, and the pyramid tombs of the kings remain in the most prominent images of ancient Egypt in many people's minds, even in the present day. And an array of over 2,000 deities, many of them uniquely associated with the afterlife, simply seems to add to the established vision of the ancient Egyptians as obsessed with death. Actually, though, they were fully engaged in life, so much so that their afterlife was considered an eternal continuation of their time on Earth. So, would it be safe to assume that they were the first folks to introduce the idea that when you die, there's like another life or something. It's just difficult to. I don't think that you can absolutely credit just one group of people with having had the idea of when you die, there's another life, because I'm pretty sure that that's everyone's biggest curiosity. Me, as a kid, before I was exposed to any kind of religion, I was like, okay, so people are talking about death. When you're dead, that means that you're not moving, you're not talking, you're not smelling, you're not eating, you're not doing all this and that. You cease to exist. But does that mean that you see black forever? Like you're like a TV, you get unplugged and you stop to function? Or what, you know? So it's impossible for me to be convinced that this is the only chance that I get in life, you know? Hey, Garuda. Good to see you. But anyways, when someone died in ancient Egypt, the funeral was a public event which allowed the living to mourn the passing of a member of the community and enabled the deceased to move on from the earthly plane to the eternal. Although there were outpourings of grief and deep mourning over the loss of someone they loved, they did not believe the dead person had ceased to exist. They had merely left the earth for another realm. And see, I remember so vividly when I was a kid, I asked my mom, so mom, when I die, does that mean that I see everyone ever whom I have met again? Like, I die, and then eventually my kids die. We will just be reunited somehow? Is that how it works? And then if I die as a 102-year-old woman, is that what I'm going to be when I pass on to my next life? Or am I going to just start over? Or is life going to be just a continuous loop of me dying at age, I don't know, 40? Like, what if you have lived only to be a certain age every single time? Like, let's say that your so-called spirit has never made it beyond age 20. I have thought about that too. I'm like, let's say that I die when I'm 40. Does that mean that when I am born again, I'm condemned to die again at age 40? Because that's just what I'm assigned. I know it doesn't make sense, but it doesn't hurt to think about that. like, since there's no real way of researching that, that's what my brain comes up with. What are you talking about? What you're talking about is samsara. Is it? Oh my god, someone actually has thought about that too. Hey JP, good to see you. Um anyways, let's see what this says. In order to make sure they reach their destination safely, the Egyptians developed elaborate mortuary rituals to preserve the body, free the soul, and send it on its way. Oh yeah, didn't they leave food and stuff? Well, maybe I should keep reading. These rituals encouraged the healthy expression of grief among the living, but concluded with a feast celebrating the life of the deceased and his or her departure, emphasizing how death was not the end, but only a continuation. Egyptologist Helen something Strudwick notes, for the life-loving Egyptians, the guarantee of continuing life in the netherworld was immensely important. The mortuary rituals provided the people with just that sort of guarantee. This is where the fun stuff starts. Good to see you too. Whee! The earliest burials in ancient Egypt were simple graves in which the deceased was placed on the left side, accompanied by some grave goods. It is clear there was already a belief in some kind of afterlife prior to c. 3500 BCE, when mummification began to be practiced, but no written record of what form this belief took. Simple graves in the pre-dynastic period in Egypt, 6000 to 3150, evolved into the mastaba tombs of the early dynastic period, which then became the grand pyramids of the Old Kingdom. All of these periods believed in an afterlife that engaged in mortuary rituals, but those of the Old Kingdom are the best known from images on tombs. By the time the Old Kingdom of Egypt, the culture had a clear understanding of how the universe worked and humanity's place in it. The gods had created the world and the people in it through the agency of magic, Heka, and sustained it through magic as well. You know, something that gets me anytime I try to read stuff like this is, what is this stuff like in the original language? Like, individuals who write about this history, how does it sound like? It's like when you watch a movie and let's say that it's released originally in Japanese and then you get the English dub. It's like it never accurately translates stuff. So some of this stuff that we be reading about, it's like how much of it gets lost in translation. I'm not saying that the stuff we're learning about right now is a lie, but at the same time, like, what would this sound like to me if I could read directly from the source of this material? Like, say, this is Egypt. So, how did the Egyptian go about their history versus the way we receive it once it's been translated and handed over to God knows how many scholars before this is the material that I receive? See what I mean? So, anyways, samsara, the cycle of death and rebirth to which life in the material world is bound. Let's see. All the world was imbued with mystical life generated by the gods who would welcome the soul when it finally left the earth for the afterlife. In order for the soul to make this journey, the body is left behind needed the body it left behind needed to be carefully preserved, and this is why mummification became such an integral part of the mortuary rituals. Holger, if you are familiar with the Bible, have you ever heard or seen the Bible mentioning mummification at all? I was asking someone and they told me that either they haven't read enough of it to know or they have never heard of it at all. So, does anybody know if mummification is mentioned in the Bible at all? Because I would imagine that if it goes that far back, then there has to be a record of it somewhere in some historical document. True, so much gets lost in translation. We have a purpose after death by providing food for bugs and mammals. You know what? Yes, I think about that so much. Every time I get worried about just obsessing over how my body's going to be handled after I die, I'm like, just make the bugs fat, you know? No, I have never seen it mentioned in the Bible. I wonder if anyone talks about that. Like, you know how there seems to be an article about how, let's say, millennials are killing this and that industry? Then there has to be an article about how come mummification is not mentioned in the Bible. Interesting. Now, I bet you that when I end the stream, if I remember, I'm going to look that up and then fall down another dark hole. Although it is usually thought that everyone in Egypt was mummified after their death, the practice was expensive and usually only the upper class and nobility could afford it. Yeah, honestly, when it comes to mummification, I've only heard that the pharaohs were the ones that had that done on them. Didn't cats get mummified too, like their favorite cats or something? I don't know. In the Old Kingdom, the kings were buried in their pyramid tombs, but from the first intermediate period of Egypt onwards, kings and nobles favored tombs cut into the rock face or into the earth. By the time the New Kingdom, the tombs and the rituals leading to burial had reached their highest state of development. There were three methods of embalming funerary ritual available. The most expensive and elaborate, a second cheaper option which is still allowed for much of the first, and or still allowed for much of the first. And the third, which was even cheaper and afforded little of the attention to detail of the first. The following rituals and embalming methods described are those of the first most elaborate option, which was performed for royalty, and the specific rituals are those observed in the New Kingdom of Egypt. So, if we have been able to retrieve mummies that go back to like this time in human history, how long before a mummy completely vanishes? Like, is it possible that there have been older mummies that we will never find out about because they have been like eaten away and disappeared? Or is it impossible for a mummy to completely disappear because of the embalming process? See what I mean? It's like you can erode a landform really bad enough to where you cannot even realize that there was a mountain there at some point. So what if we have missed some mummies because they were so old that they just disappeared entirely? But at the same time, the mummies that we do find seem to be pretty well preserved. So anyway, I'm just curious. Fossilized mummies. The preparations. We don't really need to go into the detail. Actually, heck yeah, let's dwell into the details. After death, the body was brought to the embalmers where the priest washed and purified it. The mortuary priest then removed these organs, which would decay most quickly and destroy the body. In early mummification, the organs of the abdomen and the brain were placed in canopic jars, which were thought to be watched over by the guardian gods known as the four sons of Horus. In later times, the organs were taken out, treated, wrapped, and placed back into the body, but canopic jars were still placed in tombs, and the four sons of Horus were still thought to keep watch over these organs. Oh look, one of them looks like Beerus from Dragon Ball Z. I knew that Beerus had like an Egyptian touch to him, because you can just tell. But anyways. Or not Dragon Ball Z, but Dragon Ball Super. The embalmers removed the organs from the abdomen through a long incision cut into the left side from the brain. For the brain, they would insert a hooked surgical tool up through that dead person's nose and pull the brain out in pieces. I remember reading about this in my freshman year. There is also evidence of embalmers breaking the nose to enlarge the space to get the brain out more easily. Breaking the nose was not the preferred method, though, because it could disfigure the face of the deceased, and the primary goal of mummification was to keep the body intact and preserved as lifelike as possible. The removal of the organs and brain was all about drying out the body. The only organ they left in place was the heart, because that was thought to be the seat of the person's identity. This was all done because the soul needed to be freed from the body to continue on its eternal journey into the afterlife, and to do so, it needed to have an intact house to leave behind, and also it would recognize if it wished to return to visit. Oh, yeah, I thought about that. I'm like, okay, so you're a mummified person in your little pyramid tomb somewhere, and then people would leave behind food and stuff for your so-called revisit. Now I wonder, has there ever been evidence of this actually happening? Like, you were absolutely sure that there were like no pests, no invasions in those tombs, and then the food you left behind was consumed by the supposed individual returning, you know? I want to know if there's evidence of that anywhere. After the removal of the organs, the body was soaked in natron for 70 days and then washed and purified again. It was then carefully wrapped in linen, a process which could take up to 2 weeks. Egyptologist Margaret Bunson explains. This was an important aspect of the mortuary process, accompanied by incantations, hymns, and ritual ceremonies. In some instances, the linens taken from shrines and temples were provided to the wealthy or aristocratic deceased in the belief that such materials had special graces and magical powers. An individual mummy would require approximately 445 square yards of material. Throughout the wrappings, semi-precious stones and amulets were placed in strategic positions, each one guaranteed to protect a certain region of the human anatomy in the afterlife. Among the most important of these amulets was the one which was placed over the heart. This was done to prevent the heart from bearing witness against the deceased when the moment of judgment came. Since the heart was the seat of individual character, and since it was obvious that people often made statements they later regretted, it was considered important to have a charm to prevent that possibility. That reminds me, I don't know if I ever got around to doing this topic, but I was thinking about, you know, people who think that certain objects like amulets and all that have powers, yay or nay. And I remember saying to myself, I think to some extent there is some truth to it. And the only way I believe in that is, say that my mother hands something down to me that used to belong to another family member who gave her something. Let's say some kind of a locket. Like one of her aunts gave her a locket, and therefore she's gonna give me the locket because every female in the family has had it. It's like, I feel like some kind of essence transfers to it, especially if you're an individual who was spiritually inclined, and let's say that you were really a woman of faith, then you pass it on to my mother, and my mother retained that tradition of being a woman of faith. So therefore, when it gets to me, I guess I'm going to ruin it because, okay, I'm not exactly religiously inclined, although I do like to conduct myself in certain spiritual regards, but I cannot say that I'm perfect. Like, my mom is definitely better about it than I am. I can go weeks without praying, for example. So I would feel bad that I'm ruining it for the history of that locket. But at the same time, if you're someone who gives something with like love and positivity, I feel like that stuff can somehow linger on an object. But there are certain objects that, say, a gun, I would associate it with negative energy, negative vibes, because this is an object that is used to inflict damage or even take a life. So, how is it possible for me to associate it positively in any way, even if someone dear to me gave it to me? You know? So, I feel like depending on how sensitive you are about the environment, I feel like anything that happens, the environment never forgets about it. So, let's say the United States, there was a lot of war in this land. So, if anyone ever tells me a story that the place that I'm in was haunted in some type of way, I'm like, seems legit because you know how much death happened around here, burials, violence, and I sincerely think that the environment just doesn't forget about it. Just because there are no human witnesses to that stuff doesn't mean that it doesn't linger in the air. You know, like that other living beings cannot pick up on it. It's like, you ever walk into a place and you just sense that something tragic happened there? So I think that the environment is no different. Just because maybe a lot of humans were dead at that time, or no one from that time period exists, you can just go to a place and just sense that something terrible happened at some point. So maybe so much reshaping of the land, so much landscaping, I guess that's the word I'm looking for. Maybe that can alter the environment to where some of that sort of like gets suppressed. But I don't know. That's the way I believe in energy, and like the environment never forgets. That's what I'm trying to say. So if something terrible happens, even if there are no human witnesses, it's up in the air. I cannot explain it, but I just somehow believe in that stuff. There were cases of tomb robbers eating food offerings, but nothing I have heard about mummies eating the food. Yes, I heard about that too. Um, I think the Bible talks about mummification, preparing the body for burial anyway. That is why it talks about myrrh and spices specifically used on the dead ones. Sorry for the bad spelling. It's alright. Now is the mer word the same as the MYRR word? Is that how you spell mer? Like, it's like a little candle that I see all over the places in Christmas or something. MYRRH. I think it's how it's spelled. Um, let's see. Used on the dead, preparing the body for burial. I mean, when you think about it though, there is Egyptian mummification, which is their method of burial. And then there are also so many different types of burials. So when did burial as we know it in modern days actually start? Like the way we embalm presently, plus the casket, plus because you gotta remember that nowadays, of course, that got turned into a business. So it is possible that the original rituals and acts of respect have been toned down some to where it doesn't resemble anything like old times. Because, you know, like everything modern, everything gets a makeover at some point, especially if money is involved. So I'm not saying that back then dying and getting buried was necessarily something free, but I'm just saying that it has definitely evolved, I imagine. So there's also, you can choose to be buried naturally, like be stuck in some kind of wooden box and just buried somewhere, I guess. What about the people who get buried in family property, like family lands or something? I don't know. I have to investigate that on my own, I guess. I inscribe amulets for friends and parishioners. I believe that the amulets are individual and should be destroyed after the person's death. That makes sense. That makes sense because if I think about it spiritually critically, it's something that was not designed for you. So if it was not designed for you, you could be cursed by it. Because whoever designs that had an intention with it, and then you are sort of trying to claim it for yourself, and therefore you're stealing the essence of the object, and the object simply cannot respond to you in the manner that it was designed to. Even though amulets for me are just like, I cannot say I ever had an amulet that I consider lucky for me, but there were certain objects that I like to just take with me for good luck when I was a kid, when I first heard about it. But I've long let go of that habit, so yeah. Recently, my brother gave me some coin looking things that he got from Japan, and then he handed them to me and he said, "For good fortune." And then like 2 days later, I received, was it a gift card or was it something that I sold? I think it was something that I sold. And I was like, bruh, you gave me these things and I'm already reaping the benefit of it. So when that happened, I was like, am I really crediting this object with the fact that this happened? Or was this intended and scheduled and destined to happen no matter what? Those are the questions I wish I had the answers for. Because it makes me want to keep my belief in that stuff alive. But because I tend to be overly analytical, it's like, no, there has to be an explanation. The explanation is I was doing a lot of grinding, I was spending a lot of time promoting some stuff, and therefore it sold. But, you know, the timing is what makes me feel some type of way about it. Like, as soon as my brother gave me those coins, this happened. And it had been a long time since I had any earnings on the side. See what I mean? Mer. Yes, there we go. Myrrh. It was also big business, I think, because these spices were exotic and not cheap. Okay, let's see. I'm sort of going to just skim through this. Oh snap, this talks about, there's a video link there. In the early dynastic period in Egypt, the servants would have been killed upon reaching the tomb so that they could continue to serve the deceased in the afterlife. And then I'm gonna skip that part. The Shapti dolls, which one would magically animate in the afterlife to perform work, the Tekenu would later come to life in the same way to serve the soul in paradise. Let's see. What else is here? The women would address the dead king as the goddesses speaking to Osiris. The boat sailed from the east side, representing life, to the west, the land of the dead, where it docked, and the body was then moved to another bier and transported to its tomb. Family was expected to provide for the continued existence of the departed by bringing them food and drink offerings and remembering their name. If a family found this too burdensome, they hired a priest, known as a K-servant, to perform the duties and rituals. Lists of food and drink to be bought were inscribed on the tomb, offering lists as well as an autobiography of the departed, so they would be remembered. The soul would continue to exist peacefully in the next life, following justification, as long as these offerings were made. This reminds me of a random thought that I have with relative frequency, and that is because of the digital age, it is almost impossible for you to die and for no one to know your name, have a picture of you, have a posting about you. So I'm thinking, this stuff, imagine if everybody was able to do this. Everyone was able to preserve their loved ones with such detail. Imagine if all corpses ever were preserved like this. It would seem like in the planet there are just, of course, there would be more dead people than living people, because at any given time, the later in years that you live to, the more people that would have died by then. So imagine if we all took the time and spent our resources preserving every single loved ones in our family. I guess this is the way to maintain the history of the family, but at the same time, I think that in the digital space, it's like, sure, we can tell a story about this person. It won't be as personal because, say, you cannot visit that tombstone necessarily, or the burial site, and you also really do not come into personal contact with maybe any objects that are present there, but at least the stories will not be forgotten, because I feel like some family members that pass on do tend to be forgotten because they're not talked about by their kids or their grandkids or their great grandkids. So for me, the farthest back I can go is my great grandparents. But what about their parents, which would have been my great great grandparents? So I wonder if my grandmother, if I were to ask her about her grandparents, would she know about her grandparents? I'm pretty sure she would. But I have not heard a story of her grandparents, which would be my great grandparents. Or sorry, great great grandparents. So that history has pretty much been lost, because I'm sure that no one else in the family knows about that, unless they had a really close relationship with their parents. But it seems to me like having that type of conversation was just difficult back in the day. But anyways, hopefully now with the digital space, we get preserved one way or another. Like, when I think about me, it's like, sweet, there's pictures of me when I was a kid, when I was a teen, when I was a baby, and now that I'm an adult. So when I get old, I guess I'm going to look back at these videos and be like, ugh, I miss when my hair actually had color to it, or I miss when I could see better, or when I was smaller, because I'm anticipating that I'm gonna get fat at some point. But so it's interesting. I I like to think about that stuff. Journey to the afterlife for the soul of the departed. However, a new life has just begun. Following the mortuary rituals and the closing of the tomb, the soul was thought to waken the body and feel disoriented. Inscriptions on the wall of the tomb, like the pyramid of text, or in one's coffin, as with the coffin text, would remind the soul of its life on earth and direct it to leave the body and move forward. These texts were replaced in the New Kingdom of Egypt by the Book of the Dead, one of the gods most often Anubis. I used to be absolutely obsessed with that when I was in middle school. I would read about it all the time. Anubis, 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 Anubis. Like, yeah, the god. But now it's like I don't remember anything. Would appear to lead the soul forward toward the hall of the truth, also known as the hall of the two truths, where it would be judged. Yes. Depictions of the judgment frequently show a long line of souls waiting for their moment to appear before Osiris, and these are cared for by deities like Kibet, who provided them with cool, refreshing water. Interesting. So, although you have just passed on, you still have the necessities of a mortal. Like, you need to have refreshing water. That's cool and stuff. Because oftentimes, when I think about the afterlife, I think of a life in which my necessities as a mortal are just not there anymore. It's not something I have to worry about. See what I mean? No, 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 no. Like, other times, I think that once you die, you can just float. You can take any form or shape that you want, but one of the things that I like to believe in is when you're dead, when you die, you will immediately move on to someone who is about to be born. They need a soul, so maybe your soul will go to them in that immediate second when you die, and then that other person is born or being born. It doesn't matter where in the world they're at. I'm next, but only if there are no other souls waiting to find something. If there are other souls waiting, I guess I gotta wait for the next available living being for me to occupy. And then I think that's not limited to just humans. I could all of a sudden be into the life of another animal. But when I think about that, I'm thinking, I feel like my soul has to correspond to a human again because of the way that I have lived my life and my experiences and my abilities and whatever uniqueness I may possess as my individual soul. But then when I think about that, it's like now I have to ask the question of, are animals beings that actually have souls like we have souls, like the way we think about having a soul, which is, I guess, it helps determine your personality, what your likes and dislikes are, what your qualities and traits as a person are. So can those be compared to an animal's? Can an animal ever transfer into human form? Why is it that some animals are able to be domesticated? Could it be because they understand about human aspects because they have human traits? But at the same time, living beings are just connected because we're in the same planet. So one question leads to another question, leads to another question, leads to another stupid question. And then I also think sometimes that when you die, you just go to a different dimension, but it's still within this realm, like in the planet. So, any of you guys who have ever played The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, that is the best way that I can visualize it for you. And that is when you turn into Wolf Link, you can activate the senses of Wolf Link and you can see the spirit of these people. So it's like, unless you're hypersensitive, you cannot communicate with the folks who are in that dimension. But just because you cannot communicate with them doesn't mean they're not there. So, me, as a person who's flesh and bone right now, I can only communicate with those who are the likes of me. But then when I pass on, it's like I enter a whole new social status, which is the social status of the dead. I have a floating spirit, so therefore, those are the acquaintances that I gotta make now. And other times, I just think, well, it is possible that when I die, nothing fucking happens. This is it. But I refuse to accept that because there's so much to do in this world. And the one life with an average lifespan of what, 70 years? And eventually you just break down. It's messed up. And let's consider other factors too. Like, say you get sick to the point that you cannot function. Like, like a person who's healthy. Like, say you have an accident when you're really young and you end up paralyzed or you end up blind. Like, you are deprived of experiencing the entirety of life because one of your senses has been tempered with. So, this is the only life, the only chance that you get, and you miss out on what you can absorb visually, auditorily, all that stuff. See what I mean? So, no, this cannot be the only chance you get in life. No, no, just no. Let's see, where am I at? I kept rambling. I get excited when I talk about this. It was also a big business. Okay. I do believe that that intent can be attached to certain objects and amulets. I think we all get recycled after death, so we kind of live on. Just our consciousness might be gone forever, or our consciousness transfers elsewhere. That is one of my biggestest questions. Consciousness. It's difficult, man. Like, this is you trying to think differently to what you're used to thinking like, you know? Hi Zamri. Hey Jordan. You know what happens when you die? They put you in a little box and cover you over with dirt and rocks. The worms crawl and the worms crawl out. The worms play pinochle with your snout. Yep, exactly. Your hair is always gold. Oh, thanks a lot. It's getting so long that I cannot even fit it on the frame anymore. Only humans have souls, and every soul will face God in afterlife on the judgment day. When a person is saved or not saved, God will review your life, everything you've done, good and bad. And see, when it comes to that, I also have my fair share of questions when it comes to that because I'm thinking, you know how we have people who do like missionary stuff in other countries to introduce them to the word of God when they otherwise would not have experienced it. Let's say that you happen to be one human who happens to be away during the time that you could have encountered this missionary who would have introduced you to Jesus and all that good stuff. So let's say that you live your life unaware about that thing, like the existence of Jesus and all that happened. Is that person condemned to be judged negatively if they behaved and conducted their lives in a way that went against the commandments, for example? Like, let's say that this person was not civil. So they resorted to eating stuff that you're not supposed to eat. They resorted to treating people in a way that you're not supposed to treat them. Basically, in our eyes, live a criminal life. But they did not have any kind of education whatsoever. Is that human? Because that is a human. Is that human condemned to just go to hell because he did not have the intervention of the discipline of our religion? See what I mean? So if everyone is going to be judged, is there such thing as fairness when it comes to that type of judgment? Because so many circumstances can come to play. And for us, modern people, for example, we have the disadvantage of, since we are the more modern generation of existent people, there's more possibility that the material that we get our hands on has been altered. And we do not learn the stories as they were originally told. So are we all condemned secretly to go to hell because we have not been living correctly? See what I mean? So I don't know. That's just me critically thinking or trying to think critically, like always. I just want to be compost after death so I can be useful for once. Oh man, that was funny. I find that funny. But yeah, you guys, those are pretty much some of my questions when it comes to that. Of course, reading the Bible would greatly benefit me, right? But one day, God wants the Lord to accept Christ as Lord and Savior. People cannot go to hell for doing wrong. Their only way to go to hell is if the person rejected Christ. Then how about when the person was not aware that there was such thing as Christ? That's one of my questions. The ferryman was an eternally unpleasant man named Hef, to whom the soul needed to be kind and gracious. If one passed this final test, one was rowed across the lake to paradise in the field of reeds. Every single story ever dwelling on this stuff always talks about an eternal paradise. I think the best thing in life ever would be to be able to interview someone who has crossed that threshold to make it to the so-called eternal paradise that every single ancient story talks about. And what is the image of a eternal paradise? Because for me, paradise would be A, not having to work, B, being at a place where the temperature is constantly like 67 degrees, and little things like that. But I'm pretty sure that this is different. What is civilization like in paradise, if there is such a thing? And what is your body like in paradise, if there is such a thing as you having a body? Anything can happen. The house of the soul the house the soul had loved while alive, the neighborhood friends all would be waiting, and the soul would enjoy this life eternally without the threat of loss and in the company of the immortal gods. But if you're the one who dies first, are you just finding a copy of the loved ones? Or are your actual loved ones going to meet up with you when their time to die comes? And are you going to recognize them and remember them? At the time of your death, they were a certain age. So let's say that they are much older. Do you meet them when they're much older? Or do you meet them in the memory, the last memory that you have of them? And then if you're a child, if you're a baby, what memories do you have? Can you even be judged like that? Just like we have the way that we judge adults and juveniles and all that, we don't judge kids as adults except on certain cases. So that's when I wish I did not I wish I would be exposed to just this kind of talk so that I don't feel compelled to ask these questions of my life as a mortal currently versus questioning this. See what I mean? I just cannot help it because I'm fascinated. So all I have is ask question after question after question. This final paradise, however, was only possible if the family on Earth had performed the mortuary rituals completely and if they continued to honor and remember the departed soul. There we go. There is always a catch. There's always a catch. Let's see. God will send a Christian person or an earth angel look like human, will preach the word of God, and everybody will hear the word of God before they leave this world. God is fair, heaven and hell is real. God have the book of life of names who believe in God, and every time babies die, they only go back to heaven. God controls life and death. Interesting. Let's see. Unfortunately, the things that I thought this would go over doesn't really go over it. I think I have to look up rituals, ancient rituals by region because it talks about there's the Chinese section, there's the Egyptian section, some of the European stuff, but it's not really like a list of weird stuff like I was expecting. This one is from listverse.com and it says 10 ancient coming of age rituals. Let me see what the headlines say or the titles. Roman citizens, Roman males as teenagers would have the coming of age ceremony to mark that they had officially become citizens of Rome. The exact timing varied depending on the boy, his father, and the era which they live. However, it was usually between the ages 14 and 17. For the ceremony, the boy would take off his bala, a necklace that provided protection and was given to the child at birth. I heard about that. And offer it to the Lares, guardian deities. Okay. You know what? Ads on articles should just not be a thing. Because I don't like it when they overlap over each other. Spartan training. When male Spartans turned 7, they were taken away from their families and moved to the Agoge, which was their, or Agog, which was their version of boarding school but with military training and extreme hazing. The training included physical and mental teaching so that they would become fierce and strong warriors. This period lasted for 13 years, pretty much the amount of time we spend in public schools. They underwent different tests to see if they were becoming strong and self-reliant. Their last test was the most important coming of age ritual, the Crypteia. During this year-long test, they had to live by themselves in the wilderness, surviving off the land and killing helots. The servant class. For this, the teens were not given any weapons or tools, and they were not allowed to be seen for the duration of the test. It's like in Metal Gear. Weapons and stuff is, what is it? OSP, on-site procurement. Interesting. If a teen passed this test, he would become a full-fledged soldier. He would move to the barracks and be on active military duty. He could also marry. If the teen failed the test, he would not be able to join the military ranks. Rather, he was shamed and forced to join the servant ranks. Okay. Interesting. I know I read something that triggered a thought. Hang on. Let me skim through this again. Oh yeah. The thought I had was I have mentioned this before on another video and stream a few times, but isn't it amazing just how different things are in modern days? It's like back then, ancient cultures, they had a system, they had plans, they had ideas, stuff got done. But in modern days, I feel like the mentality has shifted. I feel like people definitely, on average, would not be able to withstand this type of thing. But I wonder just how many people, say these teenage boys that we just talked about, who were Spartans, the Spartan training, like on average, would more of them succeed than not? Because if you were to put a modern person through that kind of training, what are the chances that they would make it to the very end? I feel like not that many would. Especially given our current state. Like, we don't study this thing, we don't practice this thing. Physically, we are definitely much more out of shape than our ancestors were, from what I gather. Um, like, we don't tend to be as careful. That's what I'm trying to say. And mindful of our bodies. But of course, with gyms and stuff, if you know what you're doing, you can turn into a beast, especially if you like drug yourself. But it's weird because this that wasn't a thing back there. Your gym was the planet, pretty much, your surroundings. These people did not need to have gym memberships. Like, their environment was their gym. Let's see. Let's see what's next. Greek pederasty. Pederasty started in Crete or Crete, and spread throughout Greece, becoming part of Spartan culture and an important factor in Athenian upbringing. It was the practice of an older male courting a pubescent boy. The older man would woo the boy with gifts until the boy accepted or rejected the adult, thus opposing to wait for another. If the man was accepted, they would enter into a sexual relationship in which the older man was always dominant and the boy was submissive. During this time, the older man was supposed to teach the boy important things for later life and adulthood. If the man was a teacher, a protector, and a model for virtuous behavior. Once the boy was considered mature enough, the relationship would end. He could then take on his own submissive boy if he chose. In modern society, this sounds highly immoral and sexually abusive. Yeah, yeah. But the Greeks considered it a normal part of a boy's upbringing. This stage was an important part in the transition from childhood to adulthood. I have so many questions, but the only question that I am going to limit myself to is, did this actually work? Because, like, what I mean by that is, did this actually work to where it was absolutely necessary? And there was absolutely no other way to go about this than that? You know? So, if it's something that's illegal in modern days, then I guess I got my answer, which is no. Things changed. But I guess when this is part of your culture and this is normalized and you are brought up around that, it doesn't seem like there's anything wrong with it. It would only be shocking for someone who does not belong to that stuff. Like for me, that was shocking. Like to a certain degree to read about. But anyways, pretty wild. Yucatec clothing. In different Mesoamerican cultures, the appearance of a child or teenager would indicate which stage of life they were in. Changing this appearance was part of a ritual performed as a person entered a new phase in life. Yucatec children did not wear clothes until they turned 5. At this point, the boys would don loincloths similar to those of their fathers, and the girls would start wearing skirts like their mothers. Each boy would also get a white bead tie. Fuck. Each boy would also get a white bead to tie in his hair, while each girl got a string with a red shell on it to wear around her waist. These symbols of childhood were worn until they were taken off in a ritual ceremony that signified that the children had started puberty. They were not allowed to marry until they had passed through the ceremony and discarded the indicators of their youth. As the parents decided when their children could marry, the youngsters would sometimes go through the ceremony before they reached puberty. The ceremony was conducted for a group of kids close in age rather than for one individual at a time. Mexica appearance. Markers of age were more permanent among the Mexica, aka Aztecs. Mexica girls would receive marks through scarification on one hip and breast to show that they could start school. Meanwhile, boys got lip plugs for the same stage. They received these rites of passage in a ceremony where they were taught how to behave and what their families would expect from them in the new chapter in life. The children would stay in the new school until married, which was symbolic of their transition from childhood to adulthood. Hairstyles were also significant among Mexica boys. As kids, they also had shaved heads. When they turned 10, they could grow out their hair and essentially have man buns. Most boys would catch their first enemy warrior when they were about 15. I was not expecting to read about man buns on this article. They would then cut their hair so that it was only long over the right ear. This would signify their approach to adulthood. However, they still had to capture another enemy. Until then, they had to keep their hair long on one side, which was a female hairstyle. So essentially, back then, there was absolutely no need for the question of how old are you? Your appearance did that for you, which in modern days, it should be just about the same. You examine someone's face and you look for wrinkles and the sound of the voice and all that, but apparently that's not enough anymore. It can be pretty deceiving. Inca puberty rituals. For the Inca, a girl became a woman once she had her first period. When this happened, the girl would stay inside her house without eating. On the third day, she was given some corn, and her mother bathed her, braided her hair, and gave her new clean clothes. With the kind of appetite that I have, I would have been a very violent child. If I don't eat for days. Especially on my period. Like when I'm on my period, all I want to do is eat and eat and eat and eat and eat and eat and then regret it later when I gain like 25 pounds. Her relatives would visit and she would exit the house to serve them food and drinks. Fantastic. You gotta serve others food and drinks that you do not get to consume. This was an important ceremony where her closest uncle would give her a new permanent name and her other relatives would give her gifts. Why does my uncle determine my name? For noble boys in Cusco, there was a transition ceremony in the December of their 14th year. Before the ceremony, they would make a pilgrimage up Huanacori, a mountain southeast of Cusco, to sacrifice a llama. You don't do that to llamas. You know, I'm still unsure of the difference between a llama and an alpaca. One of them is fluffier. And I think one of them has a shorter neck. A priest would smear the animal's blood on the boy's forehead, and he was given a sling to signify that he was a warrior. This was followed by a period of dancing, more pilgrimages, and more llama sacrifices. On one of the hikes, the closest uncle would give the boy a sling, a shield, and a mace. His legs would also be whipped to toughen them up. In the last ritual, he would get one ear pierced so that he could wear the plugs that signified his noble status. What you need to do to toughen your legs is calf extensions, I promise you. Aboriginal walkabout. Historically, the Australian Aboriginal ritual of a walkabout or temporal mobility was performed by teenagers as their initiation into adulthood. This usually happened when an individual was 10 or 16 years old, though the elders in the tribe decided when a child was ready for it. Prior to the walkabout, the elders would teach the child all about adulthood, how to survive in the wild, and how to perform the ritual. The walkabout itself would last around 6 months, and the child sometimes walked up to 1,600 kilometers or 1,000 miles for those of us with that weird metric system. During this period, the child was expected to survive in the wilderness on his own without interacting with another human. This would prove that he could live off the land and be self reliant, as he would have to make his own shelter and find his own food and water. The child would leave his tribe wearing nothing but a loin cloth. Though his body was likely decorated with paint and ornaments, some tribes would remove one of the child's teeth or pierce his nose or ears. This ritual was not only a test of survival skills, but the child was also meant to discover himself and communicate with his spiritual guides. As he was walking, he would sing ancient songs that were used to guide him to the land. These songs were called songlines, and their use was believed to invoke the help of spirits. Once the child successfully returned to his tribe, he was considered an adult. People still go on walkabouts today, though it's more of a self discovery act rather than a transition into adulthood. Rather than sending out children, adults go on these journeys. You guys ever read stuff like this and you can't help but wonder, why the fuck do we complain about our modern lives in a developed country? Like for me, I like to complain about the fact that my feet still hurt from 2 months ago. And also that I have to get up sometimes at like 6 a.m. and go to a place where I'm inside a building with air conditioner, and sure, I gotta be standing for 8 hours. But compared to this stuff, it's like, you'll be alright. I'm alright. Like, so that's why I like to challenge myself with stuff that makes me uncomfortable, because that's the only way you get strength. You get strength from overcoming stuff that is difficult. But this makes me feel like such a terrible person. It's like I complain over petty stuff because I just don't know any better. But reading stuff like this, it's like I have a good fucking life. I'm comfortable, but there's some people who would opt for this precisely so that they're ready, you know? Some wild shit right here. Um, what prompted this thread of thought? Shoot, what were you asking about, Holger? Because it's been a minute and I was not looking at your comments 12 minutes ago. So sorry. Zemri, have you ever heard War in Heaven about Satan was an agent, got jealous of Jesus? Yep. And the other fallen angels joined Satan to hate God? Yep. And God led the army of angels to kick them out of the fallen angels? Yep. Probably either reincarnation or our conscious mind just stops existing. The Bible tells the world nothing but the truth, front of the world with no questions. Charismatic people are warlords, most likely create a religion, plus religion is a great way to control a society. It's useful. I love being self-sufficient. Yeah, when it comes to religion, with some of the stuff that I learn about it, I'm thinking, a group of people was bored for quite some time, and they wrote a collection of stories and put it together into a book just to troll people in the future, because I guess that they could have predicted that at some point this was not going to be talked about quite as much, or some people were not going to enforce this, like the teachings in it. So I'm thinking this was just made to troll people. Um, but at the same time, if you think about it critically, your body comes with a set of rules, just like everything, for there to be balance, functionality. So any chapter in spiritual, religious, whatever's books that talk about the kind of diet that you should have, I like to respect that because they had real food back then. Whereas now it's so easy to be guided by convenience, and we don't think about the consequences that that has until we start experiencing that our body is just not functioning like it's supposed to. So whatever segment of the Bible talks about it phrases it kind of funny. It goes, you may consume the animals that have like hoof hoofs or something, and you shall not consume the animals that like clean the ocean or serve as the cleaners of the ocean, which would be like the seafood, like shrimp, crustaceans, pretty much shrimp, crab, all that stuff. And then describing pork as an abomination and all that stuff, it makes sense because apparently you are what you eat. So why would you want to eat something that has the role of cleaning up? Why are you eating that trash? So it is terrible to like think of a living being as a trashy creature, but you are what you eat. You know, whatever was part of that animal is going to become a part of you. And you definitely do not want the bad stuff. Um, let's see. Oops, I lost my place. Llamas are bigger, alpacas have softer fur. Aha. I hope your feet be better. Yeah, my right one has healed much more than my left one. My left one though, I can still find the spot just by like poking it on the side. But my right one is like 90% healed. Now, let's say 85% healed because at some point in the day, I can be walking or going downstairs and I'm like, oh snap, I gotta think about this because they hurt. But yeah, my left foot is the one that's giving me the most problems right now. But, anyways, I have faith that it will get better. I just miss a time in which I did not have feet problems. Like, it feels like so long ago. It's been 2 months now since I've been like this. But, anyways, Chinese capping or hairpin ceremony. In China, a tradition of the Zhou dynasty turned boys into men through a capping ceremony and girls into women during a hairpin ceremony. Males went through the ceremony during February when they were 20. They chose an honored guest who would roll their hair into a bun and put a cap on their head during the ceremony. The two of them and the host, who was actually the father, would wear ceremonial clothing for 3 days before the ceremony. After the honored guest had fixed the boy's hair, the guest would give a speech wishing the boy good luck in his future and telling him that he was an adult now. The boy then bowed to his mother before the honored guest gave him a new name. For a female, the ceremony happened between her engagement and wedding, though it could happen no later than age 20. It was a similar procedure, though someone would roll their hair into a bun and fasten it with a hairpin rather than give it a cap. The ceremony also included mostly women and was held in her home. Can you imagine living your life for so many years, being called by a specific name, and then all of a sudden you have a different name? There's no way I could adjust to that. Let me see what the comments are saying before I get too ahead of myself. Since we are talking about rituals, what do you think about reviving Menarche rituals? And of course, I do not know what that M word means. I'm sorry, Zamri, I know how it feels. All the stuff they say in holy books seem like they had a lot of time to make stuff up, nothing to do back then. People probably knew they would benefit from creating their own religion. Hey, I respect that. It seems pretty plausible. Shoot, I used to write stories completely out of our imagination, so what's to keep someone from idealizing what the afterlife is like and then they just put this together into a book? And also, just like you said, it's all about controlling the masses. There is just no way that you cannot have a civilization that you completely look over if they're not indoctrinated somehow. So, like, that's why in the past I have said I would like to see, for it to be morally acceptable, to have a child and you let them grow. Just grow. Do not intervene in the basis of language, diet, discipline, religion, education, tradition, all that stuff. What does this human turn into? Does the human know empathy? Does the human know organization? Does the human know discipline? Discipline as in do not eat a fucking cow in one sitting because it's terrible for you. But of course, that's why you have elders to look after you, because you as a little tiny human little being, you cannot fend for yourself. I get it. But when it comes to what you inculcate, that's what I want to question. I'm like, if there could be a person who does not have exposure to that type of thing, what would this human turn into? I can guarantee you that this is going to be a wild ass human. Just like little kids be up in the stores trying to climb shopping carts and all that, touching everything, and the parents gotta go like, don't touch that, and wow, wow. You know, human instinct is just wild. So we have become civil because we have put together psychology and all these other things that make it possible for us to live in the way that we do, which is pretty much governed by other people's ideas. So we just decided that, hey, it works. It seems to make life feel like it's much simpler, but in the grand scheme of things, you can't help but question it. And I guess that's what we do. Um, where am I at? True, nobody should never eat meat, but since sin came on earth, men and women gotta work hard to get everything. Why do humans only get religions? Yeah, that's interesting. I remember asking my mother one time, what do you think society is like amongst animals? First of all, can a bear communicate with a tiger? Like, is there such thing as understanding the actual sounds that they produce? Because, of course, you have the non-verbal language. That's pretty much what is observed in nature. It's like there is the cue of aggression, there is the cue of submission, etc., etc. So, imagine if you could actually learn to physically have a diplomacy amongst animals. What would that be like? So, of course, I guess we give ourselves the, what's the word I'm looking for? We as humans, we like to think that we're superior to everything because we can create this, we can build that, we can travel from one continent to another. Whereas animals, unless you have wings or you're a good swimmer, it's unlikely that you can do that. There's never going to be a fish walking on fucking land, right? So for us, we have adapted to pretty much everything except how to swim on lava. So sure, I guess we are distinguished, but we're still mortal. We're still pretty fragile creatures if you think about it. We require a balance of nutrition, a certain balance of air being clean. Um, like, there's only so much food that we can consume. Whereas tigers, for example, they can have raw meats, and we have to be careful about that because otherwise we get poisoned in the same manner that if you were to feed a dog chocolate, they could die or something. So, yeah, I mean, it's a pretty crazy world, complicated. So I'm glad that a book like the Bible exists to where it can instruct you of the things that you can anticipate are actually uh, risk free for you to mess with. Menarche means period rituals. We see that the Incans had some of those. And what was the question? Um, what do you think about reviving Menarche rituals? Don't need them. Don't want them. Don't care for them. No, no, just no. People do create their own gods, but people can worship anything. But the Bible is real, no matter what people think about God. And on the note of worshiping, I think that the reason the world is becoming the way it is because we are starting to worship the stuff that should not be worshipped, like celebrities and all that stuff. It's pretty wild. Miniarchy is pronounced miniarchy. Is a girl's first period. Right. My mom taught me not to steal because it's unchristian. I'm thankful for that. I think rites of passage are meaningful for all involved. That's why God created parents to teach that kid about good things to do and the bad thing not to do. It's up to the kids' control on their own lives. Elephants have primitive photo-religious rituals by playing with the skulls of dead elephants. I've heard something about that. If animals had religion, their gods would look like them. Do gods encourage racism? Like, is there alien gods? Why don't we go to heaven with the aliens? True, I see different animals being playing around each other or trying to eat each other or just eat each other. Yeah, true. See, I guess the best way to sum that up is the animal world is just very competitive. You have to compete for your resources. You have to compete for your next meal. Whereas for us, that stuff comes to us as long as we have something to trade, which is that money. So if we give that money, we are somewhat guaranteed that we can go to some food storage place known as a supermarket, and then anything we could possibly want or need is going to be there, even in altered forms. So, yep, yep. Let's see. Did I read all of this? Oh, no, I didn't. I think there's one more to go. Oh, shoot. Huh, I guess I clicked on a page while I was rambling away, and I lost my place on this thing. Yeah, it went all the way back to the beginning. Viking Man. Why does that little boy remind me of Lloyd? That Lloyd guy who played young Anakin in the Phantom Menace. What was his name? His name is Lloyd something. Or his last name is Lloyd. Lloyd in space! To be considered men in Viking society, boys had to prove themselves. In which society do you not have to prove yourself? You know what I'm saying? But they didn't have a set ritual that everyone followed. Legally, boys were considered men Once they turned 12, at this age they could marry. However, in many places, boys were not deemed to be men until they had lived through 15 winters. In Iceland, the boy had to prove that he could ride a horse properly and was able to drink with men. As older kids had to help out on farms, some places didn't consider boys to be men until they had learned to accomplish all the tasks needed to run a farm. Once they proved they could be completely self-reliant and did not need their families anymore, they were men. This included being a successful hunter and warrior as well. Specifics about how a female passed into adulthood are scarce, but girls were often married as young as 12. Thus, the wedding was most likely the main transition ceremony, turning a girl into a woman. Celtic quest. Why is Celtic pronounced Celtic and not fucking Celtic? Among the Celts, at least the Irish Celts, the coming of age ritual was very important for boys. It was a highly religious event that was supposed to turn a boy into a warrior and subsequently a man. The ritual consisted of a quest though the nature of the deferred depending on the tribe. Some boys were sent out into the forest on a scavenger hunt. They had to come back with certain items to show that they were self-reliant and capable. Others had to head far into the wilderness on longer expeditions. This would show how well they could take care of themselves. To manage this, Celts believed that the boy would be able to evoke help from a god or goddess, an important part of transitioning into adulthood. Sometimes girls would also undertake this quest, though it was not necessary for them as it was for boys. If that doesn't scream female privilege since Celtic times, I don't know what does. I'm just saying. But remember, this is coming from the girl who completely, perpetuates misogyny. Wah, 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 wah. Alright, guys. Well, this has been interesting. I am going to make a part 2 on this, definitely. Maybe until part 20 or however many we need to explore as many of these as we can, because I found this interesting. Some of this stuff I just would have never guessed about. This one's talking about shrines, letter reflection, stargazing, conduct a fire, wear symbolic jewelry. Yeah, we definitely need a part 2 on this. Yeah. And here's my little link on the Catalpa bow that my boy Holger was telling me about. British scholar of Japanese language. She was a lecturer in Japanese at Cambridge University. She managed professors in Japan. Oh yeah, one of the things that triggered this thing that I'm doing tonight was I learned about that one Japanese ritual suicide. What was it called? It started with an S. Let me see if it's still in my search history. It had an S and a P in it somewhere. Seppuku. Seppuku suicide. That's what it was. And then, of course, that led me to read up on another stuff. And then eventually there was the female one. And yeah, I just fell down a deep, dark hole. And I'm starting to recover from it by doing the stream. But anyways, yeah, we'll do a part 2 on this, definitely. And then hopefully I'll learn how to pronounce some of these shit. I think rites of passage are meaningful for all involved. That's why God created parents to teach a kid what's good and bad, control their own lives. I'm going to speed read through all of this so that we can wrap up. Events for the religious, gods encourage racism. Oh, that's interesting. Do gods encourage racism like the alien's god, live with an alien? Racism is such a broad thing. For me, it always generates more questions than answers, just like this whole thing. Zermi, what happened? God puts us in 1500s, but not today's world of 2019. God sent everybody on Earth on an epic year to be born in. Always a good time to get woke, I suppose. Bye, Zamri, wonderful friend. I love your videos and the friendship. Let's do part 2 of this video. Absolutely. I'm just now joining Suicide What? I hope everyone's doing okay. Oh, Jimmy! What a bummer. I wish you could have been around for this one, although these past 110 minutes of me sitting here has been me exploring ancient rituals. And I was telling people that the way I got this idea was I ended up finding the word seppuku, suicide stuff. Basically, samurai warriors used to inflict mortal wounds on themselves whenever they were disgraced or something. And then if they had a wife, they also were supposed to do their own type of suicide by before other armies took over, and she was supposed to preserve herself as decently as possible. Something like that. I don't know. I have to do a stream on it so that I can refresh my memory. But I was more distracted by the fact that I read in detail how this was performed, and I was like, oh. I was trying to have, like, when you read, a picture forms in your mind. Well, while I was reading about that ritual, I had all kinds of pictures in my mind. Pictures that I shouldn't have had in my mind. So basically, the idea is for you to inflict a wound that's mortal. Mortal as hell. But anyways, yeah, we'll definitely do a part 2 of this. Oh, okay, that does sound like a dark rabbit hole. Yep. And your girl spent about 2 hours on it. 2 hours of my life just dwelling on that. Because then that led me. It's the trap of the internet that it shows you a hyperlink to another word, and then another word, and then another word, another, and you stay stuck. And I am a mere mortal, and I am no different. So anyways, I guess your girl is due to get a biscuit in the morning because it's late. Alright guys, well thanks so much for tuning in to this extensive stream of mine, and I will see you soon. Let's